On.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special presentation. I'd like to thank Leon County School Board member Darryl Jones from District 3 and Pastor Darrick McGhee from Bible-Based Church for inviting us all together today for this special conversation that needs to be had. It's about our children, and we all know that we can't make any shortcuts when it comes to our children. And in this COVID environment, we have several decisions that need to be made as we move forward. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on first Mr. Darryl Jones. Darryl?
You know, I hate that I'm that guy, right? There's always that one person who's never right, who's just talking and is not muted. But I thank you, Vaughn, for bringing us together. And on behalf of a grateful community and a grateful panel, we want to tell you a happy birthday, that you chose to take this time on your birthday to take the time to help to convene this conversation. But quite frankly, it's no surprise because you've always been an advocate for children, both at Florida A&M University and in our community. So we thank you for this. I want to next want to introduce my colleague and co-host, the inimitable Pastor Darrick McGhee, who is the immediate past chair of the United Way Board of Directors, the pastor of the Bible-Based Church. He is by virtue of his vocation, he is an advocate and community champion and trustee. And I'm glad that he joins me in this conversation. And I'm going to let him do his opening remarks, and then we'll continue with our program and our discussion about the future of our children.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir. Good evening, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. It is an extreme honor to be a part of this conversation. Like many of you, and especially those of us on this panel, we have a sincere heart for the youth of our community. And this conversation is one that's necessary to be had. And we've been hearing it for months now. We'll continue to hear it for the next few weeks. The Children's Services Council will be on our ballot in the Leon County area November the 3rd. And you have to make a decision of yes or no as relates to whether or not we should establish one. Let me share in my opening that I had the privilege, along with our illustrious sheriff, to serve on the planning committee for the Children's Services Council. And I joined that planning committee really reluctantly. I was one who had raised questions and was really uncertain as to where I was on the CSC. By way of ideology, I am very fiscally conservative, but that's also not foreign to African Americans. We believe in monitoring checkbooks, and that's why we're able to survive no matter what goes on. And so my viewing was not in opposition to our youth as much as making sure that what we're doing and how we're doing it is for righteousness' sake. I pastor a church that we were able to plant 10 years ago. 9 of those 10 years, we've been on the south side of Tallahassee by choice, and we love where we are. We love servicing where we are. But I'm also able to see life through a different lens than most other people are. When you meet young men and women who have never, ever thought of college, seen college, met some kids who never even been to the Governor Square Mall, their view and their lens of life is much different than some of our other kids on the north side of town. And so with that, and me being on the CSC for 12, 14, 16, 18 months of being able to hear from all of our social service agencies and all the great work that they're doing, but also realizing that our needs outweighed our resources. I found myself between a dilemma and a decision. My dilemma is that I'm not one who's really prone to tax increases. I'm actually usually voting against any tax increase. And that's my dilemma, is what do you do? Because this is something I believe is necessary, but it's also something that requires an increase in taxes. But when you look through the eyes of a young man, a young woman who either is hopeless or is trying to be convinced that life has a better future for them, I'm a believer that I have to be a part of that. And as a pastor on the South Side, this came not about ideology, but it really came down to what is best for our children. Tonight, you're going to hear from some great men and women who are doing great work in our community and also in our state. And I want to really set the bar by saying this, that there are parties on both ends of this conversation who are making their cases. And what you're going to learn is on both sides are parties that are There are Democrats and Republicans on the pro and the con side of this argument. You, my brothers and sisters, men and women, will have to make a decision. I've made my decision, and my decision at the outset is that I'm supporting the CSC because I believe in the future of our children. And I want you to hear tonight what we know to be true on how we're servicing. And so I'm honored to be co-hosting with my dear friend and brother, Darrell Jones, who serves well our community. My church is within his district. Thankful so much for our principals who are doing a great work. To our sheriff, thank you so much, sir. To our guest, Dr. Gallen, and to Vaughn Wilson, who's celebrating his birthday with us. We are very honored, and I'll give it back to you as we proceed in this conversation.
All right. Go ahead, Darryl.
Well, I'm delighted to, now that you have set the stage, Reverend, this conversation, when we talk about the topic about the future of our children, persons in our community have brought to our attention the opportunity for a Children's Services Council. And what we wanted to do was to talk about what we know would be the impact on our community. Although this is foreign to us, it is not foreign to all communities across the state of Florida. There are a number of communities that have already embraced it and have seen it, embraced Children's Services Councils and have done so with great success. Among those communities is Miami-Dade Public Schools. So I'm honored to invite my classmate, Dr. Steve Gallen, who is the vice chair of the Miami-Dade public school system. He is also a former principal of a Title I school. He is also a former superintendent of a local school district, and he brings a wealth of experience, but he can also tell us about the impact of the Dade Community Service Council, the Children's Trust, and the impact it has had on a district, his school district, which, by the way, is very similar to mine in that it is populated by Title I schools. But through his work and leadership and the activity and the supplement that comes to a Children's Services Council, they have been able to make enormous strides in the learning, bridging the learning divide for his young people. So without further ado, the Honorable Dr. Steve Gallen, Vice Chair of the Miami-Dade Public School System.
Good evening. Good evening. I want to thank each and every one of you. I want to especially thank my colleague, Darrell Jones, and he failed to mention my fellow Rattler, although I bring greetings from Miami-Dade. Yes, the Heat is in the finals, and we did not get swept last evening. We will continue to persevere. Definitely have a great affinity being born and raised here in Miami, specifically Liberty City, a very challenged community laced with poverty, crime, drugs, violence, historically a predominantly Black community. I was able to set the pathway for my profession and my personal aspirations on the highest of 7 hills, and actually did my student internship at Rickards High School. So I have a deep love and affinity for Tallahassee. It really was the springboard for what has now been a 3-decade, 30-year career as a classroom teacher, principal for 10 years, district administrator, superintendent of schools, and now the elected and now re-elected District 1 school board member and current vice chair of the Miami-Dade County Public Schools, which is the 4th largest district in the nation and the largest in the state. I was elected in 2016 on the heels of dealing with an issue relative to the fragility and, quite frankly, the underperformance of our schools in District 1. In District 1, in our district overall, we have 75% of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch. That's Miami-Dade as a whole. It is much more acute in District 1 relative to the high pockets of poverty, high pockets of immigrant students, high pockets of challenges that we have academically. And I walked into District 1 having the highest number of F schools in Miami-Dade County. Although our district celebrated tremendous success and accolades and awards, we still had a level of silence and conspicuous silence and, quite frankly, complicity relative to what was not happening in certain pockets of our community, specifically with our children of color and our children of poverty. I inherited 5 F schools, and the first year we removed all of those schools off of the F list. In the second year, we removed the remaining 3 schools off of the D list. When I speak about the level of complicity in terms of the silence. We had one of our schools that was an F school for 5 consecutive years. 5 consecutive years. So it was not simply on the shoulders of my predecessor. It was not simply on the shoulders of the elected school board of Miami-Dade County. It was not simply on the shoulders of the superintendent. What I have learned, and I think what each and every one of us knows as Black people, I know the new norm is to say people of color, but I'm a little old school, although I'm forever young. I know that there's a difference between being a person of color and being a person who is Black. So pardon me, I'm talking about people who are Black. I understood that in our community, that with respect to our students, although it was on the shoulders of those who were charged with dealing with those issues, it was also on the shoulders of the community, where the community is not demanding, where the community is not expecting, where the community is not supporting and inspiring and provoking in a very positive way parents to get into good trouble relative to the education of their children and holding our teachers and our school leaders accountable, then we are all complicit. What we realized by creating that atmosphere of demand, expectations, and accountability is that we were able to move the needle. Although I am one that is not shy relative to conversation, at the end of the day, it has to transition from conversation to action. So I would like to proffer a few notions for you to contemplate as you move forward in this conversation. The conversation has to be 2 things. It has to be actionable and it has to be measurable. What it is that we're going to do and how we're going to measure whether or not we've done it. If those 2 tenets are not met, then we're simply having a conversation for a conversation's sake. Our children and our communities, as each and every one of you know, can ill afford for us to sit around the table and continue to have a discourse around those issues that we already know that vex our homes, our communities, and specifically our children. But what we came to realize is that in Miami, it was not simply going to rest on the school. It was not simply going to rest on the shoulders of the community. It was not simply going to be predicated on the issues relative to the faith-based community, but we were going to have some additional resources and supports and partners to put their shoulder to the wheel of this work. And that is what the Children's Trust has done. It is separate and apart from the school system. It is a separate taxing authority. It has different metrics. And actually the school system in and of itself cannot apply for revenue sources from the Children's Trust. It addresses not only the issues perplexing children, but it also addresses issues relative to families. And that is something that has been very significant in terms of ensuring that our children, specifically in marginalized communities, and those who are sitting on the shoulders and on the margins of our school system, have the additional push for educational opportunities and, more importantly, equity. As I prepare to kind of close some of my comments, I know that during the 40s and the 50s and potentially the 60s, and even knock on the door of the 70s, the issue was about equality. Right now, the issue is about equity. The issue is having a deep, sincere, and deliberate recognition that our children start their race so far behind, and they don't need the same, they need more. And what we have found is that this is an opportunity. I'm with you, Pastor. I am considered a social liberal, but I am too a fiscal conservative. I really don't believe in wasting taxpayers' dollars because I am a taxpayer and nobody's going to waste my money. But what we want to make sure is that our money is not seen as simply as an expenditure, but when it comes to the learning and lives of our children, it is seen as an investment. And if we're investors, we do expect an ROI. And that is why I always predicate my philosophy, my practices, my policies, and my paradigms around 2 specific metrics. Can I see it? And can I measure it? Is it tangible? Is it a new building? Is it a new school? Is it a new program? Or can I measure it? Is it some gains in academic achievement, learning, literacy, math, writing, whatever the case may be? And our Children's Trust does embrace those particular tenets. They require each and every applicant to have an application relative to a plan that has to be evidence-based. There are metrics that are seen on a quarterly cycle in terms of accountability. There's a 2 to 3 year cycle for performance, and that performance is predicated on you having met those deliverables. And with respect to those deliverables, that is where it's determined whether or not that is going to be renewed. So the level of accountability as relates to this investment is important not only to the school system, but to the community at large. And as I close, it is something that helps to mitigate and abate the delta between the least, the last, and the lost that too often perplex and vex our children in communities of color, communities of poverty, and amongst high proportions of Black people. And as I close, my final comment, speaking to some of you from the church, this is not a new notion. This is not a new notion for Black folk. When the home didn't do it, the church had to step in. If the church didn't do it, the community had to step in. If the community didn't do it, the school was that safe place. But each and every one of those particular entities were willing, ready, and able, and committed, despite racism, despite economics, despite the challenges that we face. Everyone had a great degree of accountability and expectation to be able to put their shoulder to the wheel of work, of uplifting our people, supporting our families, and investing and preparing our children. And so with that being said, I challenge each and every one of you to embrace this opportunity, but don't simply see it as an expenditure, see it as an investment with accountability metrics, and ensure that there's something that is tangible that you can see and measurements that you can account for. So again, so great to be here, and I'll hang around for a few moments. My colleagues, if there are any specific questions relative to what I've just shared with you about my journey, our work, and your future vision moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gallen. I'd like to first ask, can you talk to us most specifically about what you know has been the impact of the Children's Trust in District 1? Any programs or activities, and particularly as we start what will be, we're at the beginning, it's before our community for us to vote on. I'd like to know, because your community has already embraced it, what has been those impacts in District 1 through the supplement and the collaboration and complement that the Children's Trust Fund provides your school district?
And Dr. Gallen, if I could, before you begin, if you have any questions for Dr. Gallen, please type them in on the Facebook chats and we'll try to get those in. Try to get those questions in within the next 5 minutes, because we know it's his first day of reopening in Dade County. So he obviously has some things he needs to get to. But if you have any questions that you'd like to address to him, please go ahead and put those in and we'll try to get them to him before it is. Okay, Dr. Gallen, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Board member, it's been a tremendous impact, one that has, again, been tangible and measurable. And what we have to contemplate is where we are. We are in the state of Florida that ranks at the bottom in educational funding, that has the highest number of children in terms of poverty and other indicators that impede their ability to learn. So the school system alone cannot achieve the Herculean effort of meeting the educational needs of all of our students. So the Children's Trust provides that additional funding to supplement educational program and family supports and not supplant. So where you have Title I expenditures that are tied to what happens in the school, the Children's Trust provides programming after school, during school, and before school, and even on Saturdays. And most importantly, it involves community-based organizations. So your CBOs are going to be critically important. We had a conversation relative to one of our projects at the school board level, and there was a whole narrative around anchor institutions. Anchor institutions have to be those CBOs that are on the ground, that are grassroots, and that have those relationships with those communities and families. So to the extent that we're able to expand the arts, that we're able to expand academics, and more importantly, that we're able to expand opportunities for children and not do it on the school board's limited dime, it's been a tremendous impact to the tune of billions. And in our District 1, for example, I can go through a Carroll City, through a Crestview, through a Parkview. I could just go on and on through all of the schools in District 1 specifically in the Miami Gardens area that have those programs after school, during school, before school, and on the weekends, that without that funding, we would not be able to provide. And again, keep our children involved in something positive, keep them involved academically, because it's not just about cultural and artistic and social programming. It funds programs that address academics, but additionally, I hear we talk about the Children's Trust, but additionally, you can't talk about a child without talking about the family. So it extends opportunities to involve parents relative to training, teenage parents, prenatal services. It runs the gamut. If you can contemplate it as it relates to moving the needle in terms of social services and education, it's pretty open-ended in terms of ideas, but it does have a framework for accountability and outcomes.
I want to ask one more thing. I know that when you ran in 2016, uh, I know that you were plagued with or had the same challenge that we had here in Tallahassee, and here in Leon County, and that was the number of schools that were uh, based upon student testing that were received the designation of F or D. Uh, can you tell me where your district is now?
Yes, in 2016, District 1 had the highest number of F schools. I had one school that had 5 consecutive Fs, one that had 2 consecutive Fs. I had two others that had Fs. I had three additional ones that had Ds, and all of them were under state monitoring, if you will. In the first year, we eliminated all F schools in District 1. In the second year, we eliminated the 3 remaining D schools. And for 2 consecutive years, we have not had any F or D schools in District 1. Again, that is within the 4-year window. And I'm very honored and humbled that I was just reelected unopposed for another 4-year term, because we went above the promise in terms of accountability and in terms of performance. And that promise that we made is that we will continue to stand, speak, and fight for our children. But as I said to you, colleague, it is something that I'm very, very proud that God utilized me as the conduit, as the vessel. But when you start talking about programming and partnerships, such as the Children's Trust, it is not a body of work that one does alone. So everyone had to put their shoulder to the wheel. And through conversations like this, we were able to elevate that conversation into plans of action, into plans of accountability, and on the heels and hearts of our parents, to the tune of a demand. Our parents had to know more to demand more. And that is part of the work of the Children's Trust. So it's not simply about what we do for children again. It's about what we're able to do for families, children, and communities to have them involved and put their shoulder to this critical work of uplifting our schools and uplifting our community.
Dr. Gallen, we've got a question from our social media. It says, how were you able to merge the grassroots workers with local political leaders?
I would say listening to them. I think I can give you a whole narrative around it. I think my election was a referendum on how we have to be responsive to the grassroots, as opposed to the typical political leaders that we've had in positions of power for years, and in some cases, decades. We have a new brand and a new breed of leadership that has to have their ears to the streets, that have to be able to go out and touch the people. And as my father would used to say, my late father would say, be able to walk with kings, but not lose the common touch. That's one of the things that I've done, I made a commitment prior to my election, is that I was going to have town hall meetings on a quarterly basis. And I never missed it. A town hall meeting on a quarterly basis. I did open mics. I didn't screen notes. I answered questions from the floor. And we had our principals, our educators there. But it was something that I facilitated on an ongoing basis and provided a level of transparency, responsiveness, and accountability. And I keep talking about accountability because we have to deal with people on issues relative to the law of proximity. We get things done when we have people who are closest to the problem. So when I start talking about CBOs and community-based organizations, and to your point, grassroots, if we don't engage people who are closest to the issues and or the challenges and or the problems that we're trying to mitigate, abate, and eliminate, then we're spinning our heels. And I think that degree of newness, that degree of rawness, and quite frankly, me being an old city boy and having spent 10 years at Northwestern, 7 years Holmes Elementary, and you know, being able to walk with kings but not lose the common touch, has been something that has served our district well, and we continue to do that.
Thank you, Doc. We appreciate you. Everyone, we were excited in Leon County for March 23rd to celebrate my 50th birthday. I was bringing my classmate, my Rattler brother, my fellow English major from Florida A&M University to come and provide a keynote as a part of our Leon County School District Title I conference. However, the COVID-19 thought better of it, but now you see. Now I'm glad our community has had opportunity to know what I know. My classmate is a leader. not just only in Miami-Dade Public Schools, but as a national leader among school board elected school board people across the country. He is a national officer in our national organization CUBE. Which is a consortium of urban educators across our nation, and I just thank him for being a good friend to me and being a big brother to me, having been elected just before I am, and to always be a person who I could rely upon for sound advice. And so, thank you for being a part of our community conversation. And if we were together, we'd give you a round of applause. So, thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank each and every one of you. Stay the course. Do the work and be safe and be blessed. Thank you so much.
Vaughn, without further ado, I'd like to also introduce, and I apologize that I did not do this before I introduced our keynote speaker, and that was to introduce everybody who's on our call, all of our panelists today. First of all, let me start with, as my grandmother called him, the High Sheriff, Sheriff Walt McNeil, community trustee and treasurer. Also with us is our wonderful educators here in our community, in our Leon County schools. First, my sister, Carrie Lamar Anderson, the fine principal and competent principal of the W.T. Moore Elementary School, Miss Sylvia Myers-Williams, Sylvia Myers-Williams, the proud principal of the Springwood Elementary School. And then in District 3, I am also joined by Carmen Adams Connor, the principal of the Pineview Elementary School. May I also add, Dr. Gallen, that Miss Carmen Connor's school was formerly an F and moved it to a C prior to the pandemic. She is what we describe in Leon County schools as a turnaround principal, and has brought the type of climate to her school that has made the difference in student achievement. And also in District 3, we're joined by Dr. Jasmine Smith, another turnaround principal who turned her school, the Oak Ridge Elementary School, from a D to a C. And so I'm just honored to have everyone be a part of this conversation. And I'm going to turn it back in the capable hands of our host, Vaughn Wilson, to introduce our sheriff, who will come to us next as a member of the planning committee.
And one more question, Darryl, if I may. Before, has Dr. Gallen exited? I'm sure he has. Okay. Well, without further ado, we'd like to, as they say, introduce somebody who needs no introduction, but my sheriff. And I need to see him spin his gun like Gunsmoke, but Sheriff Walt McNeil, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Vaughn. It's my pleasure to be here. Let me, before I get started, let me thank Dr. Gallen for that great presentation. Obviously, he's a man devoted to the lives of our kids and our children around this state. So thank you, Darryl, for bringing him into this conversation. And also to our panelists, all the teachers who do a tremendously great job here in our community under some very difficult circumstances. And that's quite honestly why this Children's Services Council is so very, very important. I'm informed on these issues going back many, many years. I had the opportunity to visit the Palm Beach County Children's Services Council and the Broward County when I was Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Justice. And when I saw what they were doing, I only had 1 year there at Juvenile Justice, so I didn't get a chance to bring and start talking about that because the governor at that time moved me into corrections and I had to focus on those issues. But it's always been a burning desire of mine to see if we can build that Children's Services Council here in Leon County, primarily because it's outcome based and it's best practices, and it makes sure that our dollars are being spent exactly where they need to be spent to move that needle that we talk about. Now, from my perspective, I started as your sheriff, and I came in saying that we have to embrace the all-in initiative. The all-in initiative for all of us in Leon County primarily means that we can't do this in silos. We have to make sure we have a comprehensive plan that addresses the needs of our children in this community. And to date, we have not had that comprehensive plan. And in my mind, and the way I look at this, the Children's Services Council builds that ability. When you start talking about what are the three things that this Children's Council is going to focus on, and I think the number one issue, quite honestly, is the readiness level of our children. When they are in pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, those are the formative years that, for whatever reason, we have not been able to embrace here in Leon County. Our children are not ready when they go into the first grade, and certainly they're not reading on a third grade reading level when they get to the third grade. And from there, you know who they come to see me? That whole process pushes those kids in my direction. And that's not a place that I want to see more and more African Americans come. And so I've focused and talked about this since the day I was elected, that we have to have a comprehensive plan that deals with the front end of our delivery system and deals with our kids and puts our kids in a position where we can win. Not only have I now embraced that and understand that, but I believe most of the business community of our city has come to embrace and understand that. When you get the chamber saying that we agree that we need to spend some taxpayer dollars addressing this problem, when you get business people who are saying, we understand now that to have a vibrant community, we have to have people who are capable and ready to take on the complex jobs that we want to bring into Tallahassee, Leon County. And this Children's Services Council, in my opinion, positions us perfectly to move forward. I will stop. I think you guys have heard me talk about this before, and I had a little debate this earlier today with the Tallahassee Democrat. Well, let me just say this example. Generationally here in Leon County, I had the misfortune of being the Secretary of the Department of Corrections. And I'll never forget, while being in that setting, to see from Leon County, the grandfather who is now in prison, and then his son is now doing time in prison. And we're bringing in the door of the prison his grandson. This generational problem. And if you look at the byproduct, or what puts us in this position, invariably it goes back. You ask that grandfather, can you read? How good is your reading? He will say, I dropped out of high school 90% of the time. Then you talk to the son. How would you do it in school? I went to 12th grade, but I didn't get a diploma. I got a certificate. And now we're talking about the grandson in the same circumstances. And these are all kids coming from Leon County into our revolving door of our prison system. And I honestly believe that we have before us the opportunity to put a game changer in place. I put it this way, and I sort of said it today during a Democrat discussion. And I said it to the county commission, and I've said it to many of you in our community, that our crime problem is significantly a problem. It's a significant problem in our community. And unless we do something on the front end, we're going to simply continue to play the same game over and over and over again. Now, the difference, they talk about some of these outcomes in other communities that have children's services councils. You know, I've looked at our community. We are small enough. We're not Miami-Dade. We don't have the horrific crime problems of Miami-Dade. We can get this done. If every citizen in this community gets behind this Children's Services Council and demand that it focuses on the front end of our delivery system for the kids of our community, we can turn lives around. We can build businesses and jobs here for our kids for generations to come. Instead of most of our kids leaving Leon County, they come back later on, but they go other places because they can't find those jobs they need here. So I'm going to stop and just again say to you, I totally admire our teachers. I think they're doing a fantastic job under some very difficult circumstances. And I hope that everybody listening to tonight will get behind this Children's Services Council.
Sheriff McNeil, I am reminded of the words that you told us when you were first elected 4 years ago, and I recall you having quoted Frederick Douglass.
I do that quite often. Yeah, Frederick Douglass basically talked about our children, man. If you, it's much cheaper to build a child than it is to build a man. It really is that simple to do it on the front end.
And Sheriff, because you are you are directly involved with persons when they come into the system. You know, you have articulated to our community time and time again the importance of modeling finer manhood and womanhood in our schools. I'd like you to talk about and because two of our panelists here know firsthand what has been your commitment to our children, particularly at Pineview Elementary School and Oak Ridge Elementary School.
Well, I'm not sure how you're framing that, Darryl, but I'll just simply say that there is absolutely no question that our children are our future. And unless, particularly in the African American community, we live in a day and age now where information, good information, bad information, whatever you want to call it, moves at the speed of light. And when we have our kids, and the teachers can correct me about this, but the way our system's set up is we teach you to read up to about the third grade. And once you get past the third grade, there's no more efforts in terms of trying to teach people to read. And that is absolutely the most fundamental aspect of being employable in our society, is being able to articulate various positions and read and understand exactly what people are asking of you. And we're having some deficits in that direction here in Leon County. It's no surprise to me that we have one of the highest poverty rates in the country. And again, that impacts on African Americans disproportionately.
Thank you, Sheriff. Vaughn, you have anything else anyone on the panel like to add anything to the Sheriff has shared? Sheriff, I am interested in one thing, because you and Pastor McGhee were a part of the initial role of the planning. Would you and Darrick McGhee take a moment just to talk to us about what has been like the timeline on this for our community, the engagement that y'all have been a part of? If y'all wouldn't mind to just pause and talk about that right quick, you and Pastor McGhee, and that this process started some more than nearly 2 years ago.
Darrick, you want to try that one? I can't remember all those details, man.
Yeah, Sheriff. It's always good to see you, Sheriff. So we began our work around September 14th of 2018. I believe we had our first planning committee meeting. And if we go back before that, when our current mayor, John Daly, was a county commissioner, the county commission actually passed an ordinance actually to convene a planning committee to look at this. And so originally there was conversation about putting the CSC on the 2018 ballot, and that was delayed to 2020 by our county commission. And part of that delay was to convene a planning committee of all sorts and persons in our community to come together and to kind of walk through this. So from September of 18, we began to have conversations monthly, and we heard from every social service agency within our community. They came in, they presented, we allotted time for them to be able to present on all things. Our chief judge, Judge Ostrom, actually chaired the planning committee. And the makeup of that planning committee dealt with business individuals. The sheriff was on there. We had our state attorney was on there. We had opponents and proponents on there. And our task was simple, was to look at it, not to make a recommendation for or against it, but to present, here are the things we need to be looking at by way of a CSC, the needs that we see that are out there. I will tell you, through many of our meetings, the one thing that became clear was not that we were not servicing our populations, but that the need was greater than our resources. And what you saw unanimously in uniformity was that every social service agency that came and presented, all were in agreement for the most part that this was a need that we all need to get around. And we found ourselves over that time period hearing, seeing all that was going on. You had hospital executives there, and everyone recognized and realized the challenge. Now, listen, I want to be clear. The final vote that was had by the planning committee wasn't unanimous. It was majority, but not unanimous. There were still some concerns raised at the end. But as Dr. Gallen mentioned about his town hall meetings, we also afforded any and every person who wanted to come in to speak the opportunity to come in and share their position of support or opposition and their why. And we heard them out. We had people come in from other areas that have a CSC to share what they've been through. We had resident experts come in and have those conversations. And again, I will tell you that everything morphed along the way. We had faith-based community on there as well. And so where things are, that the report of the planning committee was submitted at the end of last year. It is now public for all those to view with recommendations. And then from there, everything is aiming toward November the 3rd, which is the election day, where all persons will have to make a decision in that regard. I will share with all of us, and the sheriff has mentioned as well as Dr. Gallen, I will share with all of us that listen, let's be clear. The great thing about our democratic process is that you have the right to have your position and your opinion, whether you're for or you're against some. And we've heard some of our opponents who are elected officials publicly share their opposition and their why. And I respect that. I absolutely respect their position on that. But the fact of the matter is there is a great need in our community. And this is an opportunity for us to tackle that head on. And that was really a part of the work that we did. And then I'll bring some things toward the end. But the one thing I want to make known at the outset, the CSC based on Florida statute is made up of 10 persons. And I'll break that down at the closing. So I want to be very clear in some of the things that we're hearing from the opposing side about the governor having full authority. Statute lays out the CSC. It lays out the membership. It lays out the appointment process. And so we as the planning committee, we did not intrude on that. We did not overstep our lane that was given by the county commission. We remain solely within that discretion.
Sheriff, would you like to add anything to that?
No, Reverend covered very well.
Well, as we continue our conversation, Vaughn, I'd like to again introduce our principles. One of the things that part of the reason why I think that the Children's Services Council is so very critical is because we realize that if our community's priorities change from year to year, from administration to administration. We have seen the gamut of public interests to include issues relative to our environment, issues relative to mental health, issues to a variety of cultural and sociological concerns that take our attention and grab our attention for a moment, and we find ourselves putting all of our interests and ideas and focus and human and intellectual capital to those situations. But hear what the Children's Services Council, my friend Sean Pittman talks about the will of the electeds. Here now, through the Children's Services Council, our children no longer have to be relegated to the flavor of the month. Here we as a community, by virtue of our support of this initiative, are saying that our children, success and preparation matters to us. I oftentimes say when I was running for office, if you want to know a community's values, look at their checkbook. What this Children's Services Council will do for us is to give us a separate checkbook whose expenditures are entirely intended to meet the needs of our children and preparation for them to go to school. We realize as a public school school board member, I am very much aware of the monies that we identify for our children K through 12. But what all of our speakers are telling us is that it starts before then. And preparing our children for their public school education and to turn them into lifelong learners starts long before they come to us in our public schools. So without further ado, I want to introduce again our our fine principals who are on this call again, Miss Carrie Lamar Anderson, the principal of the W.T. Moore Elementary School. Also with us is Miss Sylvia Myers Williams of the Springwood Elementary School, Miss Carmen Adams Connor, the principal of the Pineview Elementary School, and Dr. Jasmine Smith at Oak Ridge. Vaughn, would you show our slide for what is our the planning committee's priorities? Do you have that handy?
Move a little forward, Mr. Jones, and I'll pull that.
I think I may have it. Let me see.
I made it so that you can share your screen.
Okay. No, host disabled screen sharing.
Hold on, let me see.
Well, one of the things that let me share a couple of statistics with our viewing public that they too might know what we know. Our principals will tell you, with the exception of Carrie Lamar Anderson, whose school is a great. All of our schools are great schools, but Pineview, Springwood, and Oak Ridge are Title I schools. And let me explain Title I just to give everyone a perspective. The reason we talk about our Title I schools and the nobility of their work is that the lion's share of their student populations come from working class families. And subsequently, because they come from working class families, these children are on free or reduced lunch. The reason that matters in the context of a school district is that the schools that are not Title I are able to have entrepreneurial revenue sources born of their being able to keep the proceeds that come from them selling lunch every day, as well as monies for after-school programs. A lion's share of those resources will remain on the campus at non-Title I schools. Well, if everyone's got free and reduced lunch, those supplemental dollars are not available in Title I schools. And so that's why community support, as well as additional federal assistance for Title I schools, is necessary. But that's why community support is so important, because we also need to identify other resources beyond what we're able to identify or make available through the monies that come from the state through the FTE. Now, let me tell you some statistics that might give you pause. Less than 2/3 of our children, greater than 2/3 of our children, do not come prepared for kindergarten. Also, at the same level, less than 60% of our children who are eligible are enrolled in early learning programs before kindergarten, like preschool, pre-K, Head Start. 60% of our kids who are eligible are not prepared, are not enrolled in those programs. These are the types of issues that we want to mitigate through the Children's Services Council. I'd like for our principals to talk about the importance of school readiness in terms of their preparation, and particularly at elementary school, because they're the first persons who engage with our kids in our public school system. So if y'all would talk about school readiness, and let's start with Dr. Jasmine Smith at Oak Ridge.
Okay, thank you. And Daryl and Pastor McGhee, thank you for having me this evening. I hope that everyone can hear me. This is a topic that I have become extremely passionate about just in my work at Oak Ridge. Less than 50% of our students that are in kindergarten on a typical year come to us having been in pre-K. What we've seen from these children when we talk nationwide about an achievement gap, what I have come to learn and to experience at Oak Ridge is really for our children, it's not so much an initial achievement gap as it is an access gap. So our children that are 3, that are 4, in many instances don't have access to pre-K or early childhood education opportunities. And so I would say to anyone who's contemplating whether or not an investment in our children is a sound investment, I would honestly say that this really is the gift that keeps on giving. Because as community members, when we think about graduation rates, when we think, as the sheriff spoken about juvenile delinquency, things of that nature, the percentage of folks who become homeowners, the wages that they earn as adults, all of that in many instances can be traced back to their early childhood experiences. And at Oak Ridge, I think about the very first group of children that I worked with that are in third grade now. They were in kindergarten at the time. And we were lucky enough to have groups of community members who adopted this group of children, the Tallahassee Women's Club, Bible-based church, Thomasville Road Baptist Church, and they surrounded this group of children with resources, with programs, with investments, coming out to work with them on a weekly basis with the goal of those 100% of those children being able to read on grade level by the time they got to third grade. Now, if you can just imagine this group of children, half of them had not been to kindergarten before, but by the end of first grade, 75% of these children were reading on grade level. So you trace back and just think, if we'd only had them in pre-K, if they'd only had the opportunities and exposure in pre-K, and their parents were certainly willing, they were very supportive. Many of them just didn't know how to access resources or to navigate the system, so to speak. But, you know, as my grandmother would say, when you take the approach that the church takes, which is to come as you are, as opposed to how as you ought to be, then you get a little bit more back from folks. So I say that our return on investment, even having been out of school since March, that investment that was made in those children in kindergarten is significant. And just in continued work, I would say that it's tremendously impactful, and it's going to be even more impactful in light of the pandemic. We're looking at extremely low numbers of boys and girls this year that are in pre-K compared to past years. And so I say that to say that anything that can be done to support families, to encourage families, to be sure that they understand what we have to offer, I would say is worth the investment.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. We also have Carrie Lamar Anderson. W.T. Moore is a very diverse student population. One of the things I want to also clarify so that everyone will know, the Children's Services Council will serve all children. Imagine my district, District 3. My district extends from Rickards High School all the way to Fort Braden Elementary School. These children who come from working class backgrounds in all of my schools, Fort Braden is a Title I school with a diverse population of both children who come from working class families that are white, Hispanic, and African American. We also have other Title I schools like Chairs and Woodville, again with diverse student populations. The Children's Services Council will help those children who come from working class families where we have identified that there are barriers to their learning. The Children's Services Council will help to be able to mitigate those barriers that stand in the way of children who come from working class families, right? And so Ms. Carrie Lamar Anderson, although her school is not Title I, her school has a very diverse population, and she stands on the cusp. So she has children who come from working class families compared to affluent families, but she has to serve that diversity of that population, and she knows what difference this can make, because it won't just serve Title I schools, it will serve Title I kids who come from Title I populations from across the width and expanse of our district. Ms. Anderson.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that, first of all, the diversity at our school, the diversity at W.T. Moore is probably the thing of which I'm most proud about our school. We have, I just like to say all the time, a little bit of everybody. With that also means that there are some pots of funding that we don't qualify for because of a certain percentage of our population. However, that does not mean that we don't have children who fall within those categories that we still have to serve. We still have to provide learning experiences, enrich learning experiences to close learning gaps for our children who have not come to us as prepared perhaps as they should. And so the Children's Services Council excites me for many reasons, but especially because I feel like it will be a bridge for schools that are like mine, who are sometimes, I like to say, kind of lost in the middle. We're not a Title I school. We're not a majority affluent school. So we're right there in the middle, but we have children along the entire spectrum of learners. And so the services that the Children's Services Council could provide to a school like mine, where we do see children who are not coming to kindergarten prepared. We do have learners who need additional support in order to just be on par with their classmates. And that is a Herculean task, to take a child who has not had those early learning experiences and help them to become a learner that's ready for school each and every day. Our teachers take on that task every day and they do a fantastic job. But I echo the sentiments of my good friend, Dr. Jed, when I say, what if there were more opportunities? What if there were more things that could present themselves for these children to have early learning? And so the statistic that speaks to the amount of children who are not participating in early learning experiences, who are eligible, that is really startling, and it is concerning. And it's something that I'm concerned about as a principal of a school who serves all types of children. Also as a parent, I have 2 children who my husband and I are working very hard to raise. And we want them to have these learning experiences as well as their friends. And it is super important that we as a community put our money where our mouths are. If our children are truly our future and they are our most precious investment, then it's time for us in Leon County to step up and to do what we need to do to make sure that our children have all of the opportunities that are available to them. So I 1000% support this effort, and I urge all of my friends and colleagues, parents in our school community, everyone to do the same.
Mrs. Anderson, we appreciate you. We know that your daughter Karis has her 7th birthday, and mommy's on the television with Uncle Darryl. So please, thank you for your contributions. I know you have to get back to your family, but thank you for what you provide, particularly as you describe the unique opportunities and challenges that you find with your diverse student population, and the benefits that can be found through a Children's Services Council for the children that you serve.
Thank you so much. You all have a great evening.
Darryl?
Yes, sir.
From a journalistic perspective, everything I've heard so far, it's all on the positive. It's almost like, why wouldn't we do this? But can you explain to us why there's been opposition to this? What exactly is the opposition? Is it, and Darrick may be able to, Pastor McGhee may be able to speak on this as well. Is the opposition basically because of the tax associated with it and not the operation of the fund itself? What actually is the opposition? Because from all of our accounts, the sheriff and our the school board assistant in Miami and everyone, and even the principal so far, have said that this needs to happen. What is the point of opposition?
So I'll share with you all. Great question, Vaughn. I'm so happy you brought that up. I was going to bring it up at the end, but this is the perfect segue. So there's been 2 major raised concerns. The first one is the tax, and the maximum tax that can be levied, this everybody can know, is half of a meal. Half a meal is so that varies person to person. Let me give you an example. So if you use a medium household of $100,000, and that household is without a homestead exemption, the most would be a little under $50 a year for that house. If that same house using that same medium is $100,000, has a homestead exemption, you're right up under $25 per year. So the first major concern is that it's an increased tax. And why are we taxing individuals to do this? The second thing that you hear is an argument about the governor has too much authority as it relates to the makeup of the CSC. And I think it's important to insert this, that section 125.901 of the Florida statute actually defines Children's Services Council and how it's made up. And it's made up of 10 persons. 5 of those 10 are actually identified in statute, and they are superintendent of schools, a local school board member, the district administrator from DCF, Department of Children and Families, or his or her designee. You have then you have one member of the county governing body or the county commission. And then the fifth one would be the sitting judge over the juvenile cases, Judge Shostrom in our area. Then the remaining 5 are gubernatorial appointees. And the remaining 5 is important because what happens is that the county government will submit to the governor 3 names per 5 seats, per 5. So basically 15 names will go to the governor, 3 per the remaining 5. And the governor is supposed to, based on statute, make the appointment of those 5 seats from the 3 names he received for each seat. So anyone who's arguing that the governor has too much authority, he only can govern based on what the statute has given him. The same thing has been used in the other CSCs. So this is not a grab by the executive branch. The statute governs in this regard. So those are the main ones. You hear things about it's a blank check and what things are. It's important to understand also that if approved November the 3rd, your ramp up is about a year ramp up of being able to hire executive director, put things in place, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there is about a 12-year lifespan on the CSC upon creation, where the voters 12 years later will have the right to assess it and determine whether or not they still need it or not. Now, you could argue that you can actually lessen that based on the county commission's work. People will challenge you one way or another, but the statute is very clear as to how this works. I will last submit this. There is nothing that is being proposed for Leon County's CSC that is indifferent to what the other communities that have a CSC are currently doing. It's important for everybody to know that we're not creating anything new. The statute governs what can and cannot be done. At the end of the day, our county government and our electorate still have a say-so in this regard. So Vaughn, that's a really, really great question. And I want to make sure that on the record, we understand that answer. Thank you for that, sir.
And we're going to come back to that, Vaughn, because because one of the things that I joined Pastor Darrick McGhee as a fiscal conservative. But one of the things, and in fact, I have been extremely critical of the Children's Services Council when it was in its planning stages until they completed their final report. But what I am aware of is that with those appointments, the county commission, which is a diverse body of electeds, will be making the recommendations for those 15 persons who will the 15 nominees of which among that group, 5 will be chosen. We here in Leon County will be able to directly influence those persons who will populate those seats. We'll be able to influence those who will make the initial recommendations to the governor. And then once they are seated in their respective places of service, we can then influence them to talk about what we know are matters that the issues that matter to us. More importantly, it is the community process that Reverend McGhee and the sheriff have been involved in that helped us to identify what were the issues of principal concern that will govern the work of this Children's Services Council. One, helping children to learn, helping children to be healthy, and helping children to be safe. So that's school readiness, school support, physical health of our children, the mental health of our children, their development socially and culturally, as well as dealing with issues of the hunger and thirst, the hunger of our children, and food stability. So with those being our priorities, Pastor McGhee will further explain later on down the line how those issues will be addressed by the Children's Services Council once it is organized. I'd like to talk with my friends Sylvia Myers-Williams and Ms. Carmen Connor at Springwood and Oak Ridge, respectively, about what they know to be children's health and it being a barrier to student achievement. Matter of fact, both of them have had to deal with that in their respective charges. If y'all would weigh in right quick. Starting with Ms. Connor.
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned that. Food insecurity is a dilemma in our community. We have a help shelf right outside of our school where we supply with non-perishable foods for our community. In addition to that, we have a pantry inside of our school that our parents have open opportunity to come and share at any time they want. But the interesting thing that blew my mind, the day that we installed this food pantry about 2 years ago now, within hours of putting that food pantry there were visitors to get what they needed out of that food pantry. And what we've noticed day after day, at least 3 to 4 families visit that food pantry each day to get something that they need for their family. In addition to that, we get calls all the time from families that need to visit our food pantry. So in our community, food insecurity is a huge issue. And if there's if there is a resource that families can have that takes one thing off of the plate for them to have to worry about, this would be the thing. So the CSC, I am definitely going to shout from the top of my roof for everyone to vote yes for this, because for our community and for my school, and particularly, this helps our school in a way that will impact not only just food insecurities, but also how it impacts our school. And I wanted to come back to something that Jasmine said earlier. 40% of our kindergarten students at our school have never had a preschool experience. But that's primarily because of the cost of preschool and the things that come with that. It forces schools like Jasmine and my school and Sylvia's school, it forces us to be creative. It forces us to be creative with time. It forces us to be creative with our resources that we have. And having the CSC, if this comes into fruition for us, this is going to be the answer to a lot of the dilemmas that we face each day, because it's going to help solve a lot of the issues that happen for our students between the ages of 0 and 5. It's going to cover the food insecurity that exists in our community. It's also going to cover our students' education. And when they come to us, we can have a different plan of action. But right at this very moment, we have to be very creative when students come to our school hungry in the morning. That's one of the first things we do. We make sure everyone has breakfast. And when they don't have it, we make sure that they have extra. But that is a big deal, that kids come to school hungry each day. And then secondly, for our kids to come to school prepared, we can't do it all with our Title I funds or the resources that we get with our school. We have to depend on another resource. And the CSC, that would be the resource that we would need to make the greatest impact on our schools.
I appreciate that. But we also deal, Sylvia Williams-Myers, we also deal with student health as well, don't we? As a barrier for some of our kids come to school dealing with concerns that also regrettably are barriers for them being able to learn. Dental health, children who need eyeglasses, right? Sylvia? I mean,
Yes.
Ms. Myers, I'm sorry.
Ms. Myers, yes, you're correct. If they're not healthy, they're not able to sometimes to even be in school, okay? If they're coming to school and they're not feeling well, or if they don't have their glasses, or if they don't have their medicine, if there's medicine that is required for them to be able to focus and learn, those things are important. But I also want to kind of pivot a little bit because this is something that I've been thinking about all day. So I want to make sure that I share this. As today I sat with my reading coach, and we were preparing our reading intervention groups. And we had so many students that were 1 to 2 to 3 grade levels behind. And almost every grade level, that there is a group of students that I actually have to pull because we don't have enough people for students who need these resources. And Sheriff McNeil talked about the revolving door of the prison, but I want to talk about one of the first revolving doors, and that's special education. And when I first got to Springwood, we had a large amount of students that were in exceptional student education. Almost a third of the students were in exceptional student education. Over half of those students were what you consider specific learning disabilities, or SLD. So I want you to understand that when a student is diagnosed or said to have a special learning disability, specific learning disability, it is because they're not responding to interventions. So it does not mean that they have anything cognitively going on. So there's nothing that is preventing them from learning. They just don't have the foundation, right? Or they need more time. So Dr. Gallen talked about having more time, and more time means early programs, right? And more after school programs to help catch these students up. Our teachers work really, really hard to provide these interventions for these students, but a lot of times it's just not enough. So if we catch it on the front end in our preschools, and that we don't catch, if our students need extra time, we're catching it with after school programs that some CSCs and some other counties have provided for their students as well. All of these things are to benefit, and all these things will help our students to get ahead so that they are responding to these interventions, so that they are reading on grade level, and they're not being filtered into special education programs just because they need more time. And I just think, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I just think that that's really, really important. And I understand that, you know, it's tax money, and it's more money that some of us will have to spend, but it is indeed an investment, because a healthier school brings healthier families and then healthier communities, which also means higher property higher property values, thriving businesses in those communities. So it makes sense, and it makes dollars and cents. So I really want us to really think about more than what we're putting in, but what we can get out in return.
I appreciate.
We've got some comments here.
Okay.
Our friend Virginia Daly is on.
Hey, Jenny.
She said, thank you, Sheriff McNeil, for your leadership. And she also said, these ladies are community heroes, talking about our principals on boots on the ground, serving our children and families. Donna Hill says, I'm not hearing this information anywhere else. If this is to pass, you need to get these concrete examples to the voters. I'm hearing concerns about the makeup of the council, and yes, the governor will appoint members. So far, what has been in the media has been very vague. Get some specifics out there. We've had some people that did post a statute in the comments because there was a question asked. The numbers that Pastor McGhee said, they are stated here. And finally, Beverly Robinson says community must invest in our children, especially now during COVID-19. And we got some Go Mustangs in there somewhere.
That's Carrie Lamar. That's the W.T. Moore Mustangs. We've got Jaguars, we've got Eagles, and we've got Owls.
and some Go Sylvia Myers are in here.
Yeah, somebody on there told me, make sure you get my sister's name right. I think that was one of Miss Sylvia Williams Myers' kin people.
And Daryl, you know, we're shared in a lot of different windows, but in one of the watch parties, and I couldn't get back to it, Arnett Moore asked a question. What community-based organizations have bought into this? Are you familiar with community-based organizations that have bought into this?
And that's what's critical to this, Vaughn, right? What the beauty of this program, and everyone wants, and one of the principal words that has been bandied about that helped to convince me, I know has helped to convince Pastor McGhee, the sheriff, the Children's Service Council and its response is entirely community-based, right? Remember, children being healthy, children being prepared, right? When we talked about the three tenets, helping children to learn, helping children to be healthy, and helping children to be safe. What we're doing in this Children's Services Council, and Dr. and Pastor McGhee will help to explain this even further, is that once the Children's Services Council is organized and is funded, the priorities that we as a community have set, the health of our children, their ability to learn, and their safety, will be the methods by which those monies will be put on the street through a competitive process, much like what we already have through the CHSP process that puts community development block grant dollars on the streets. But their responses, right, we're going to harness the intellectual and cultural capital found in the expertise of our community with those organizations and community-based organizations that are already serving these populations. With these dollars, they will have to report back to this community, right? Report back to this Children's Services Council accountability for what they will have done to come up with creative responses to meet the challenges and the barriers that our children have to learning and proper emotional and mental growth. So imagine this, if we talk about children-based organizations, for example, if we're talking about healthy children, the Bond Community Health Center or the Neighborhood Medical Health Services, two of our federally qualified healthcare centers in our community, would more than likely make application from monies that the Children's Services Council provides to make certain that those monies are going to be able to impact children most specifically, based upon those priorities that we've set. So that's how we get our community-based organizations involved. For example, Second Harvest right now is presently doing a book bag lunch program. Our children during this pandemic who are not in school, one of the first concerns that principals and board members like myself were concerned about is, how are we going to feed my children? How are my babies going to get their food? Well, here now, when we're talking about food security, persons like Second Harvest will more than likely make applications for those dollars for specific, unique, funding-based models that they'll then have to report the success of the impact that those dollars will have had coming directly from this source, the Children's Services Council. Have I hit that right, Pastor McGhee? You're muted. You're muted, brother.
I said some great things too while I was on mute. I agree with everything you said, Darryl. And also I'll add on there that we have several of our organizations. So all three of our local chambers, so our Greater Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce, our Minority Chamber of Commerce, Big Bend Minority Chamber of Commerce, our Capital City Chamber of Commerce, United Way of the Big Bend of Tallahassee, NAACP Tallahassee chapter. All of these organizations and many more have signed on in support to this work that's being done. And I think that's very, very important. There's also individuals from both sides of the political spectrum, Democrats and Republicans, who have signed on to this and have shared that, listen, typically I would not be supportive of tax increases, as I've shared, I aforementioned, if were it not for the knowledge of knowing what our needs are here, and were not for the knowledge of knowing that this actually has a proven track record. Based on that half meal that I aforementioned, we can see between $6 to $8 million annually coming in to be of assistance in that regard. And so I've always said this, and I continue to say it, you can't unknow once you know. When you recognize and realize that there are depravities, there are needs, there are struggles, you can't unknow it once you know. We've heard many times in many settings about 32304 and what's happening in that area, but there's great work being done to combat that. These principals we heard from tonight are doing great work. Ladies and gentlemen, those of us who have had our children home from virtual school, and we're recognizing and realizing the work that it takes to educate our kids. I have two who are great kids, but I more appreciate the education that my kids are getting from their schooling. I share that with you because on the other end, you have some families that don't have the resources that some of us have. And so we have a responsibility to be of assistance. There are still some questions unanswered. These things will be resolved as the CSC committee, the appointments are made and they're put in place. There's an onus on there. Darryl mentioned this, and I want to go ahead and insert it now, that there were three main focuses that were given. It was success in school life, which is helping children to learn, healthy children and families, which is helping children to be healthy, and then stable and nurturing families and community, which is helping children to be safe. So each CSC that's already established, what they did is they actually identify focused areas by which their monies are going to go toward. And so the monies that they bring in, they're actually attacking in those regards, because you really can't point to an ROI on the monies you bring in unless you actually identify what you're focusing on. It was mentioned earlier by Dr. Gallen about actionable and measurable. And so because we've identified through the planning committee, here are the focus areas we need to be focusing on in our community, now you can hit action and measure those as well. Listen, I say this about my church. My church is on the south side of Tallahassee. What I always say is, listen, I'm not trying to win the north side of Tallahassee. That's another church's responsibility. I am trying to service the local community around my local church. And I'll do a disservice to my community around my church if I'm trying to also win Summerbrook. There may be needs out there, but there are enough churches that way to do that. I'm trying to win around my community and partnering with other churches to do the same exact thing. In this regard, these are our focus areas, which work for Alachua County, which is the newest CSC on the book. Working for Miami-Dade County or Palm Beach County is what they've identified. For our community, it's important to know that we have food deserts in this area. FAMU is actually a food desert in our community. That means that they're deprived of actual healthy food product. That means that there are some communities that don't have a Winn-Dixie or a Publix. They're going to the local convenience store, to gas station, to grocery shop. You know, like I know, they're not getting healthy foods there. They're getting snacks and unhealthy things. And those kids are now having to come to school with health challenges. And so we're focusing in that regard. One of our focuses is going to be on mental health. And ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has exposed a lot of things in families of parents and of our children. And so when you think about these principles and what they're living with every day, they're literally sacrificing all that they have and what they know to service our children. And so I've heard this say before, and I want to mention this now, that listen, the city and the county could amend their 5-year plan to come together. They could partner. That nothing is prohibiting that from happening. That is very much possible. But here is the fact of the matter. It hasn't been done yet. And so we can't keep putting good things on hold while we wait on someone else. We have to literally put in place what needs to be done, need to be put in place in that regard. And so shame on me as a guy who's versed in politics to let my ideology stand in the way of reality. And the reality is there are people who are struggling in our community, and this is a proven product that actually could be a benefit in that regard. And so again, for Leon County, we've identified focus areas. We're not trying to compete with the other CSCs and what they've identified, but we recognize and realize that one stat in particular, the rate of food insecurity statewide is 13.9%. Statewide for food insecurity, 13.9%. In Leon County, our food insecurity number is 21.1%. So we are actually exceeding the statewide average on food insecurity. You can go a little further on school-related arrests. Statewide is 15%, it's 19% in our county. These are real numbers, ladies and gentlemen, by credible statisticians who are putting this out there. And so these are the things that we're trying to combat. The church has a role, right? The schools have a role, but the community does as well. And we have a responsibility to make sure that we're not continuing to wait and put the onus on the electeds and say, do something, do something. They can do something, but we can as well. And that is the responsibility, what we need to be doing. And so again, I understand the concerns that have been raised. I get that, but I also want to say that one of the ways to do this is not to defund the police, which is one of the proposals that's out there. That doesn't actually help the situation. We got to look at it. When you look at a child in a deprived community, you look at them in the eyes and you see there is no hope in their face. They have no belief. They're literally the first generation possible of graduating from high school, going to college, and you realize that what they're lacking is not dreams, it's resources. And this is an opportunity to put in their place resources to help them to achieve it. Every child wants to be LeBron or Michael Jordan, but guess what? A lot of our kids want to be able to see themselves succeeding to the next level of life. And so I challenge all of us in the regard of realizing that you can unknow once you know. When you see these numbers and realize these are real families and real people who are going through these every single day. And so we've identified for our community, here is our focus. Here is how we're going to have action and measure those actions. And this is how the voters also can hold accountable to CSC by saying, based on what you put out there as the priorities, years later, we're not seeing any positive movement here. It's not working. You have that right. You also can say, we're seeing a change take place. This is working for us. And so I'm imploring all the voters to really educate themselves on what's going on. Don't fall into the scare tactics. Really educate yourself on what's going on and come to the realization that there is an opportunity for our community to step up and provide a new resource along with other resources to service our community. You can't give a preacher the final moment. I'll take it.
Is Sheriff McNeil still on?
Yes, he
Yes,
is.
sir. I'm here.
Sheriff, I'm gonna put you on the spot here.
All right.
That speech you made at the prayer breakfast about the circle.
Yes.
I want you to rehash that, because that is so important. And if there's ever anything that points to that, this CSC could help complete that other circle. But can you give us that story, please, right now?
Yes. How much time we have? Let me address a couple of things here. First of all, thank Pastor for talking about the defund the police and the dollars being switched. That's something that I think one of the county commission, one of the city commissioners are now looking at, perhaps in lieu of doing this, which we know needs to happen. They're now saying perhaps city and county government should do this, which hasn't been done and been asked for 10, 20 years or more. But what would happen if we start talking about defund the police? First of all, they can't defund me, constitutional officer, but they can do something to the Tallahassee Police Department with respect to, if they go in and take their budget and say take $8 million out of the police department's budget, or $4 million, whatever it might be, the police chief's going to say, okay, what do I stop doing? He's going to stop doing crime prevention things that's in his budget. He's simply going to do law enforcement, which will result in more people being arrested, because now the focus is not on prevention, it's on totally locking people up. The same thing I would do. I perhaps spend, I'm not sure how much in my budget. I know I spend something close to $1 million or more on preventative programs, reentry programs, youth programs, trying to assist the school system in dealing with these food deserts and Title I schools, and trying to make sure that those Title schools are getting the resources they need. So if you were to do that, you would not be bringing this community together. In fact, you'd be doing more extremely separating the problems that we have till we don't have a community working on these issues. But to get to your point you asked me about, just wanted to talk about that defund the police for just a minute. I have said from day one that if we're going to do this, if we're going to make the changes in Leon County, it's going to take this entire community working together. What I look at right now, and what I think people propose to continue doing, is having us all scattered and trying to do this in our own silos. And I gave the example from National Geographic's, where you've got this herd of oxen, and you've got two herds, and you've got one herd that has a number of oxen that are ready. And when the fox comes out of the hills, coming down to attack the family of oxen, there are enough of them that they get into a complete circle, and they face outward with their hooves. And as the wolves try to get in to get the babies, because they put the babies in the middle, and this family of oxen are able to fight off the wolves that are trying to take advantage and take and kill their little calves. Those wolves were not successful with that group of oxen, but they went on down the path just a little further, maybe a mile or so, and they come across another group of oxen who probably should have been in the other herd, but they were by themselves, something close to 15, 20 or so. They tried to form a circle, but they could only form a semicircle. And their babies were in this semicircle. And the wolves were able to come into that circumstance and kill every one of those calves. And quite honestly, that's what we've got going on here in Tallahassee, Leon County. We've got a service delivery system that's only a semicircle. We need a complete circle that engulfs our children and protects our children from the wolves that are out there in our community.
Man, I love that story, Darryl, so much. And I love the way I got to stop calling him Chief. You know, I've called him Chief for years. And
I call him Chief sometimes too.
He know, as they say, he knows my heart. But that's certainly why I was interested in getting on this call, because we absolutely have to close that semicircle. And if this is an opportunity for us to do that, I'm 100% behind it.
Well, Vaughn, I appreciate you for bringing us together, and I appreciate Pastor McGhee for sharing this stage with us. I want to thank our principals most specifically. Uh, their perspective, they know every day what they encounter. They have been most kind, but they have not shared with you. That's why I love serving the schools that I serve, because I see humanity on display at its finest every day. Every time I visit any one of these schools, I see that I know that Pastor McGhee, who he and his church have a heart for our children. Let me tell you what I witnessed. Pastor McGhee and his entire congregation adopted all 400 students at the Oak Ridge Elementary School and made sure that those children had book bags, because they realized that school supplies was a barrier for a whole lot of our kids who come from working class families who did not have those school supplies to be able to do the work that they were required to do, whether they were operating virtually or on site. I know that Jasmine Smith, Carmen Connor, and Sylvia Williams Myers, if you go in their office, all of them got some food and changes of clothes and personal hygiene items stashed away in their closet to meet the needs of these children who come to them every day. How oftentimes those children come to them, most people are also unaware that some of our Title I schools even provide dinner for our kids, for their children, and they are armed with that dinner to take back home to feed other siblings. So when we talk about food insecurity, this is real. And so here now, when we talk about, as Darrick McGhee described, as Ms. Williams Myers described, like Carmen has described, about food insecurity, that's real. And so when we talk about a return on our investment, as the sheriff described, if we invest in our children now, Sheriff McNeil won't have to deal with them later. Because we create a climate of, they come to us prepared to learn, we create lifelong learners. But imagine that child who had barriers, who did not go to an early learning program. So when he gets to kindergarten, he's already behind. He deals with the insecurity and the esteem issues about his having been left behind by no fault of his own. And then by the time he gets to the third grade and he's tested in this system, he doesn't do well. And so he then finds himself not having the same joy for learning that the child who was prepared had. And so then by the time he comes to an age, as we say in the church, an age of consent, because school does not capture his attention like it should, because he's woefully unprepared, then there are other things to distract him. So when we talk about making this investment in early learning and it paying dividends, imagine our own childhood experiences. We don't have to go back. We remember those children who did not do well in school and the barriers that they came from. So let's, as a community, make an investment in children whose names we do not know, that we might be able to stem the tide of low achievement such that we can create a community of lifelong learners. Imagine if we take money, a dedicated funding source, and are able to harness the intellectual capital found here in the city of Tallahassee, the capital of the state of Florida. Here in Tallahassee, we enjoy the designation of being the 10th most educated city in the country per capita. So imagine if we had monies designated to harness the human capital and intellectual capital found in our community-based organizations and our two major research institutions. Imagine what change we could see in our community. I'm asking you, Pastor McGhee and Sheriff McNeil, and all of us on this call are asking you to say yes. and vote yes on November 3rd. That Pastor McGhee has described that the contribution, well, it's negligible for our homeowners. We're looking at possibly less than $50 per $100,000 value of your home. But imagine the return on investment in the lives of our children when we equip our community-based organizations to repair the disparity and need and repair the barriers that our children have to learning. I want to thank everybody. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say? Our principals, Ms. Myers, Ms. Connor, Dr. Smith?
No, just vote yes.
Yes, and thank you for having us.
Opportunity to talk about just making the investment in our children.
Yes. And thank you for allowing us to have this conversation. This is one that if you're a Title I principal or a teacher, you are passionate about. We all speak the same language because we deal with the same things on a daily basis, and we go home at night with these things. And this is one thing that could make our nights a little more restful if we had a resource that could come in the form of supporting our children before they get to school, meaning between the ages of 0 and 5, and then supporting them throughout their matriculation through school. That would be awesome. So vote yes, and thank you.
Well, I do want to say one last thing. As I understand it, when you get your ballot, the Children's Services Council is on the reverse side.
The last one.
So make sure you turn it over, and you make sure you make that mark and say yes, and support this important initiative and making this investment in our children. I promise you, when you cast this vote, it will not come back to you void. Anything else, Pastor McGhee, Sheriff McNeil?
Well, just happy birthday to Vaughn Wilson. Thank you for spending your birthday evening with us, my friend. We really do appreciate that. I really tell your wife we're sorry for taking you away from whatever you're going to do with the family, but we appreciate you.
This was important enough to me that my family and I, we celebrated this weekend because we had to be on this call. I mean, we were fortunate enough to be able to send our kids a kids academy. So they were well prepared by the time they entered elementary school. But I do know the disparities that if you haven't had that experience being in a formal learning environment, you start at a disadvantage. So I'm all for this. And just like one of the comments said, yes, we've got to stop just taking care of our house and take care of community. And that's exactly my point. My kids are going. I got a senior high school and a freshman in college. They're past this area, but we have to help our community by staying involved.
And let me, since you brought that up, I gotta follow up with you. The folks at Kids Academy, PJ and them, they are fantastic. But there's another reality, Vaughn, and our principals have not didn't get a chance to talk about this. That early learning experience is not the same at every child care center.
Right.
One of the things that we're going to do one of the things that the Children's Services Council will do is to ensure equitable instruction across Leon County. Right? Regrettably, there are child care centers that don't do like they do at Kids Academy and at Brownsville and other great schools like that, where they with culturally relevant and some child care centers are just babysitting children, and they'll go to these centers and still come to them woefully unprepared. Here with the Children's Services Council, one of the major investments that they will make is to provide the type of professional development in that industry to ensure that the persons who are, no matter what school you go to, you'll enjoy the same type of quality education, because we're going to make an investment in the industry, much like the school district is trying to do. But we'll be able to do this at an even larger level to ensure that any kid who enrolls in those programs, do you realize it costs more than $1,000 for a kid to go to early learning centers a month? Imagine what that kind of cost is for working class families. And so those who have subsidized childcare deserve to have centers that are good stewards of their taxpayer dollars. Carmen Connor, when I was running, used to tell me the story about a kid who would come to her school and she had asked him, say, son, what's your name? He'd say, man. No, baby, what's your whole name? Little man. Because he had come from an early learning center that had not taken the time to teach him how to write his name, to identify himself, and things that we just take for granted is not always happening in all of our child care centers. So we as a community are going to make that type of investment to remedy that problem, to ensure that our children who come to any school in our district will be prepared to meet the opportunities commensurate with a quality public school education.
Darryl, thank you for that. If I could, I know we're closing out, but let me leave our listening audience with my perspective on this. And that is, if we're not voting for the Children's Services Council, then perhaps unwillingly, unknowingly, we're voting to build a larger jail. I don't call them jails, but a larger detention facility here in Leon County. The population of that detention facility right now is busting at the seams. And I'm trying to avoid asking for money to build another detention facility. But we've got some choices to make. If we're not making this choice, we will certainly at some point in the future make that other choice.
I think that's a note to leave on. Pastor McGhee, any final comments?
We have a charge to keep.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone on this call. We appreciate you all. And Vaughn, again, thank you so much for convening us. And thank you to everyone who's been engaged and watched this conversation on Facebook. Please share it. And again, vote yes for the Children's Services Council.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, ladies.
Thank you, ladies.